Okay, let's dive deep. Take a moment and imagine that the historical narratives we're most familiar with, the ones from the textbooks, maybe don't tell the whole story.
Right, like there's something else operating just beneath the surface.
Exactly. What if, woven beneath the surface of known history, there have been powerful forces, secret knowledge, and hidden networks operating quietly, perhaps even overtly, shaping events and society in ways we rarely consider?
It's a compelling thought experiment.
And what if, as a source we're exploring today dramatically claims, a hidden underworld has been working for centuries with the specific goal to penetrate, dominate, and destroy established society?
That's a premise that immediately grabs your attention, isn't it? It really challenges the fundamental ways we might think about societal structures and historical progression.
Absolutely. And that intense, provocative claim is exactly where we're starting this deep dive. Our source material today comes from excerpts of a book titled Occult Theocracy.
Occult Theocracy. Even the title is intriguing.
It is. The author of this work, along with a group of investigators they refer to, state they spent a full decade meticulously tracking the activities of these alleged hidden forces.
A decade. That's serious dedication. So our mission here is to serve as your guides through this specific source material.
Right. We're going to strictly unpack and explore the author's detailed and often startling claims about the nature of secret societies, occult practices, and their alleged influence not just on history and politics, but even on religion.
And the key word there is strictly. We're focusing only on what is presented within these excerpts, helping you navigate the author's arguments, their specific examples, and the world they describe. We're not validating, just exploring their claims.
Exactly. The author wastes no time in setting a rather stark stage for their argument. They open by suggesting that what women might traditionally perceive as safeguards around themselves and their children are, in the contemporary era.
Oh.
Well, at the time of the book's writing, of course. Nothing more than a mirage of the past. This perceived lack of traditional protection, according to the author, leaves individuals vulnerable to the operations of these unseen forces.
Wow, okay. So a sense of lost security. They also observe, quite pointedly, a fear among good people to simply be good.
A fear to be good. How so?
The source describes this as a contemporary reluctance or apprehension to embody virtue, perhaps out of social pressure, or maybe a sense of powerlessness against the pervasive influences it describes. It's an interesting psychological observation.
And the driving force behind the book itself, what's the stated goal?
Well, the stated goal of Occult Theocracy, based on these excerpts, is to expose the means and methods employed by what the author calls this secret world or underworld.
Okay.
They claim these methods are used to affect not only the so-called upper classes, but also the better portion of all classes. So it's broad.
Not just the elite, then.
Apparently not. And the author specifically pushes back against the idea that just avoiding membership in certain groups or, staying personally uninvolved offers any real protection. The implication is these forces operate on a much broader, more systemic level.
Okay, that sets the stage pretty clearly. Let's start by understanding how the source defines theocracy itself and traces its alleged evolution. It sounds like a key concept.
It is. The author presents a specific path for the development of theocracy, which they define, simply put, as the rule of priesthood.
Rule by priests. Got it. How does it get there, according to them?
They trace it back to metaphysical thought. It starts, apparently, with deep reflections of a few individuals, reaching the height of mysticism.
So very internal, personal beginnings.
Right. But then, from this mystic understanding, the author claims creeds, doctrines, and full theological systems are issued. These are then imparted to others and accepted, forming the basis of established religious systems.
So it starts as mystical thought and becomes a public religious system.
Exactly. And upon these accepted religious systems, the source states a ritual or law is grafted, like layered on top.
A law? What kind of law?
This law serves to discipline pretty much every aspect of life for adherents to their mystic, moral, social, and even physical existence. The sustained exercise and enforcement of these laws, the author concludes, is what ultimately evolves into theocratic rule.
That makes sense. A system of control built on belief. And within this evolution, they see two primary branches emerging.
That's right. The source identifies two distinct schools or branches. There's the popular branch, which is focused on influencing the everyday thought and mode of life of the masses, the public face, if you will.
The exoteric side.
You could say that. Then there's the hierarchic school, which the author claims is where chosen adepts were rigorously trained. Their purpose, according to the source, was to safeguard the rules and doctrines that the high priests had imposed upon the people, the inner circle.
And the author seems particularly interested in the corruption of religious systems as the catalyst for this theocratic rule, right? Not just the structure itself.
Precisely. The source doesn't just describe the process. It highlights the perversion of original religious principles as leading to theocratic control. They point to specific historical examples in the material: Brahmanism, the ancient Egyptian cult, Mosaism or Judaism, Christianism, and Mahometanism.
So across multiple major religions.
In each case, the author suggests the original system was corrupted, leading to the rule of a priesthood. That's the core argument here regarding these examples.
And within these systems, there's a claim about an underlying secret belief, something hidden beneath the public face.
Yes, this is a key thread the source weaves throughout. They claim that monotheism, understood not just as belief in a single god, but in the sense of a fundamental first principle.
Ah, okay, like an ultimate reality.
Exactly. That this was the accepted basis of the esoteric or secret belief or doctrine within these systems. So beneath the public rituals and laws, the initiated few allegedly held a secret belief in this singular foundational principle.
Interesting. The author seems to be explicitly choosing a specific focus for their investigation, stepping away from traditional religious or scientific debates.
That's a crucial point they make. The source states its explicit aim is to step aside from the common conflicts between theology, science, and ritualism. They're not interested in those debates for this book.
So what are they interested in?
Instead, the author intends to follow the outgrowth and ramifications of esotericism, this secret knowledge specifically focusing on its development into perversion and subversion. They're tracing the path of what they see as corrupted secret knowledge working to undermine the established order.
Okay, tracking the dark side of secret knowledge, so to speak, according to their view. So if theocracy is ruled by priesthood, how does the source define or describe occultism? What are its forms, according to this material?
Well, the source provides a summary of what it considers the principal forms of occultism. One claim is that it involves the manifestation of fallen angels or spirits, sometimes even when not actively called upon.
Like spontaneous hauntings.
Yeah, something like that, maybe. The author contrasts traditional theological accounts, where saints are depicted repelling such entities, with the practices of certain occultists, which are described in very negative terms as vile practices veiled in profoundest mystery.
And this is where the source introduces the controversial concept of Luciferians. It sounds distinct from just, say, general spirit communication.
Yes. The source claims that beyond the drawing room mediums who might perform for entertainment, there are occultists whose moral sense is absolutely perverted. These individuals, the source asserts, believe in Lucifer, but they believe him to be the equal of God and worship him secretly. This is the group the source identifies specifically as Luciferians.
Equal to God.
Okay.
And they make a specific distinction between Luciferians and Satanists, because those terms are often used interchangeably.
Within the framework of this source, yes, that distinction is important. Satanists, as the author describes them, are primarily characterized as individuals mentally deranged by the use and abuse of drugs.
Okay, so associated with substance abuse and mental instability in this view.
Right. These Satanists, the source claims, focus on accusing the Christian God. Luciferians, according to this source, do not call their alleged infernal master the spirit of evil or the father and creator of crime.
That's a surprising distinction.
It is. The author even cites Albert Pike, a name that comes up a lot, as allegedly forbidding the use of the word Satan among these supposed Luciferians.
Interesting. Where does the source locate modern occultism then, if it makes these distinctions?
As of the time the book was written, the source identifies modern occultism primarily with two traditions: practical Kabbalah and Indian yogism.
Kabbalah and yogism.
Okay. It notes that both of these paths have had their adepts throughout history, operating with varying degrees of openness.
And speaking of Kabbalah, how does the source define it? Because that's a term with a lot of history and interpretation.
The source is quite definitive here, and again, this is their definition. It defines Kabbalah as occult science itself. It's called the secret theology of the initiates.
Secret theology.
But the most striking claim, and we need to emphasize this, is the source's claim, is that it explicitly states Kabbalah is essentially satanic.
Whoa. Okay. That's a very strong statement.
Extremely. It is presented by this author as the counter-theology to the God of Christians. So in this author's view, Kabbalah isn't just a mystical Jewish tradition. It's positioned as the core secret doctrine of this underworld, fundamentally opposed to Christian belief.
Got it. That's crucial framing within this text. And that leads us into the source's discussion of magic, which they divide into two main categories.
That's correct. The source describes two primary divisions, divining magic and operative magic.
Divining and operative.
Okay.
And divining magic, the act of foretelling or discovering hidden knowledge. It lists several forms.
Yes. The source lists quite a number of branches: astrology, aromancy, palmistry, hydromancy, anthropomancy, pyromancy, oneirocritics, and cartomancy.
A familiar list for anyone interested in divination methods.
Pretty much. It's a wide range of practices aimed at uncovering hidden information or predicting the future.
Can you elaborate on a few of those based on the details the source provides? Like anthropomancy, that sounds grim.
It is. Anthropomancy is described as the purpose of divining the future by the inspection of entrails. Human entrails.
Right.
The source references historical accounts, like the alleged practices of Gilles de Retz involving children, or Tacitus's report of Druids in ancient Britain consulting their gods by examining the entrails of captives. So it points to alleged historical precedent.
Okay. What about some others? Oneirocritics.
That's described simply as the interpretation of dreams for divination, much more common. Aromancy is the study of aerial phenomena like clouds or wind patterns, and hydromancy is the study of liquids, maybe water gazing, for the purpose of divination.
Got it. Now, the source issues a very strong warning about the other category, operative magic, specifically theurgy and necromancy, calling them always disastrous.
Yes, the author is unequivocal on this point. They claim that individuals who engage in these specific practices must die, and almost invariably under terrible conditions. It's presented as an unavoidable consequence.
How so? What are the alleged effects?
The source describes a progression of negative effects. Initial giddiness, then catalepsy, followed by madness. A complete breakdown, basically.
And it's accompanied by some eerie alleged physical phenomena, not just mental or psychological effects.
According to the source, yes. They describe a disturbed atmosphere, woodwork cracking, doors trembling and groaning, particularly when certain individuals are present, and often, it says, after a series of intoxicating acts.
Intoxicating acts?
Yeah. Weird sounds are reported, and sometimes bloody signs are said to appear spontaneously on paper or linen. The source notes that these signs are always the same and are classified by magicians, according to the text, as diabolical writings.
Bloody signs. Wow. And how are the mediums, the people involved, described as reacting to these alleged phenomena?
The source claims that the mere sight of these events induces a state of convulsion or ecstasy in the mediums. They are said to believe themselves to be seeing spirits. And this is where the author makes the striking assertion that Satan, who they call the spirit of evil, is transfigured for them into an angel of light. So a deception is implied.
And this leads to some of the most graphic and disturbing claims in the source regarding the alleged requirements for these manifestations to occur. We should probably preface this carefully.
Yes, this section of the source is indeed explicit and quite disturbing. It alleges that before these supposed spirits will manifest, they require sympathetic excitement produced by sexual intercourse on the part of their devotees.
Okay.
The source claims hands must be placed in hands, feet on feet. Devotees must breathe in each other's faces, and these actions are often being followed by others of an obscene character. That's the direct claim.
There's a very specific and dark claim about the ritual requirements. The source then connects those engaging in these practices to a particular state of mind, doesn't it?
Yes, the author claims that initiates who engage in these described forms of excesses come to believe themselves to be the elect of God and the arbiters of destiny.
A kind of spiritual delusion.
That's how it's framed. They are presented as seeing themselves as successors to the fakirs of India, and the source warns that for these individuals, no warning will save them. They're depicted as being beyond help.
The source also includes a rather curious historical note about ancient Greek methods seemingly intended to counteract these effects or cure the people involved.
It does, yeah. It's quite detailed. The source describes ancient methods allegedly used to cure such illnesses, meaning the state induced by these practices. These methods supposedly involve terrifying the patients, concentrating and exaggerating the perceived evil into one great paroxysm.
Yeah.
This included making the adept sleep in the cave of Trophonius after specific preparations, descending into a dark subterranean cavern, becoming prostrated by intoxicating gases, experiencing ghastly dreams caused by incipient asphyxia,
Sounds incredibly dangerous.
and then being rescued while prophesying on a tripod. The source claims these tests were intended to give their nervous systems such a profound shock that the patients would never dare mention evocations of phantoms again. Like aversion therapy almost.
A very extreme form. And just to reiterate the source's distinction between theurgy and necromancy, just so we're clear on their terms.
Based on this material, necromancy is limited to the summoning of dead souls. Theurgy, which is presented as the highest degree of occultism in this view, involves summoning superior spirits, or gods, with the source specifically mentioning Lucifer in this context.
Okay, shifting gears slightly, the source makes a direct and rather foundational connection between Gnosticism and the origins of certain secret societies. This seems like a core argument.
It certainly does seem central to their thesis. The source makes the bold claim that Gnosticism itself is marked with the seal of Lucifer.
Again, very strong language. And they argue it has had a continuous existence throughout history, since the time of the Apostle Peter.
Yes, that's the claim. That it has persisted without interruption down to the present day, periodically changing its mask, like an underground stream resurfacing in different forms.
And here's where the source links it directly to a major secret society, claiming the founders of Freemasonry were Gnostics. This is a huge claim.
It's a very striking and specific claim presented in the source, absolutely. It asserts that the 7 founders of Freemasonry were all Gnostics, identifying them as the Magi of the English Rose Gras.
Does it name them?
Yes, the source provides their names. Theophile de Segaliers, Anderson, George Payne, James King, Calvert, Lumsden Madden, and Eliot.
And Gnosticism's alleged influence is said to be literally imprinted on Freemasonry's central symbol.
That is what the source contends, yes. It claims that Gnosticism, as the alleged mother of Freemasonry, imposed its distinct mark in the very center of the chief Masonic symbol, the 5-pointed star. This star is described as appearing in the middle of the interlaced square and compass.
The pentagram, essentially.
Right, which the source says is a prominent symbol in Masonic temples, seals, and rituals. They're drawing a direct symbolic lineage.
The author also seems to view Gnosticism and modern occultism as essentially the same thing, just different eras.
They are explicit about this within the source. They state there is no difference between the Gnosticism of the early ages of Christianity and modern occultism. They even add that the ancient mysteries of Gnosticism were allegedly well known and even published in the past.
And the fundamental principle that links them both, according to the source. What's the core shared belief?
The source identifies the core principle of Gnosticism as the double divinity, dual principle, duality.
Okay.
They state this is exactly the theological theory of modern occultism. The source then elaborates on specific Gnostic claims as presented in the book. That the good God was Lucifer, that Christ was the devil, that what Christians considered vice was Gnostic virtue, and that Gnosticism literally means human knowledge.
Wow. That's an inversion of traditional Christian theology, presented as the Gnostic view here.
Completely. It's presented as a direct opposition.
The source also touches on some early Gnostic figures to illustrate these points.
It does. It names early figures considered Gnostic doctors, like the Basilidians, Ophites, and Valentinians. Basilide of Alexandria, active around the end of the 1st century, is specifically mentioned.
What did he teach, according to this source?
The source claims he taught metempsychosis, the transmigration of souls or reincarnation, and the author draws a direct parallel, asserting that 19th century spiritists have invented nothing, merely copying Gnosticism, even down to this theory of soul transmigration.
So nothing new under the sun, in their view?
Pretty much. Basilide is also noted for allegedly claiming salvation came through intelligence and light.
Moving from ancient doctrines to alleged methods of control, the source delves into the purported use of hypnotism within secret societies. This sounds like it could get controversial.
This section makes some incredibly explosive and serious claims, yes. It connects these methods to major historical events and controversial figures. The source directly links the use of hypnotism and control to what it calls the terrible power behind the horrors of Russia's sufferings and world revolution.
Okay, that's a massive claim.
It is. Furthermore, it explicitly connects these methods to what it terms a mad and evil scheme of world dominion by the god people, the Kabbalistic Jew. Now, it is absolutely vital, crucial when discussing these highly charged and sensitive claims that we reiterate constantly. These are presented specifically as claims made within this particular source material, Occult Theocracy. We are not presenting them as verified facts.
Understood. Absolutely critical clarification. So the alleged goal of using these methods within the societies sounds quite manipulative based on that description.
According to the source, yes. The primary interest of the alleged masters of these societies is presented as not being soul or astral development for spiritual growth in itself.
Not for enlightenment.
No, except as a means of forming passive illuminized tools, completely controlled in mind and actions. The goal, as presented by the author, is control and manipulation, creating puppets, essentially.
And how is this state of induced mediumship or control purportedly achieved? What's the mechanism described?
The source describes a mechanism involving almost impossible exercises designed to habituate the nervous system to extreme tensions and fatigues, like intense training.
To what end?
This training allegedly transforms the nervous system into a living galvanic pile, capable of powerfully condensing and projecting what the source refers to as that light, astral. This light, according to the author, intoxicates and destroys, but is also claimed to lead to mastership and self-mastery and the ability to enter the domain of the supernatural.
Intoxicates and destroys, but also leads to mastery. That sounds contradictory.
It does. It's presented as a dangerous power. The source directly challenges the view of one writer, Hudson, on the limits of hypnotism regarding secrets.
What was Hudson's view?
Hudson apparently claimed that hypnotized subjects would never reveal vital secrets or the secrets of any society they belong to.
And the source disagrees.
Strongly. The source calls this a fatally false conclusion. The author contends that when dealing with members of a secret society or order, this process goes beyond simple autosuggestion and involves something deeper that does facilitate control and ensures secrecy is maintained, perhaps even reinforcing it.
The initiation process in Freemasonry is used by the source as an example to illustrate this alleged mechanism of control. How does that work, according to them?
That's correct. The source details the initiation, claiming that purification begins and that certain forces are sent through the candidate's body during the ceremony. This is said to happen particularly at the moment of becoming an entered apprentice Freemason.
Forces sent through the body and the lodge itself.
Parts of the lodge itself are claimed to be very heavily charged with these forces, like the environment is part of the process.
And the result is allegedly a loss of free will for the candidate. They're no longer in control.
According to the source, yes. The candidate becomes no longer a free agent. The oath they take is allegedly administered under hypnotic force, which has also been used simultaneously to instill a feeling of fear.
Hypnosis and fear together.
Right. This fear, the source claims, then guards the secret of initiation and serves as the controlling agent wielded by the initiators over the initiated from that point forward. Fear becomes the lock.
The role of the right worshipful master, the head of the lodge, is presented as crucial in this process. Why?
The source asserts that the right worshipful master must be a genuine occultist.
A genuine occultist, not just a ceremonial leader.
Apparently not in this view. This is because, according to the source, it is his role to hypnotize the candidate. They quote from a work titled Freemasonry Universal, which states that the RWM gives the light, the pure white light of truth and illumination.
Okay, illumination.
But the author of Occult Theocracy then explicitly equates this illumination with Kundalini, alias serpent power, alias electromagnetic force, alias the sex force, etc. So they're collapsing all these different concepts, spiritual, energetic, physical, into one force used for this alleged hypnotic control.
That's quite a leap, connecting all those terms. And they draw a parallel to training methods found in Hatha Yoga.
Yes, the source mentions that in the Western world, someone dedicated to studying Hatha Yoga can train to perform feats like neutralizing gravity or changing size cities, essentially.
Right. Traditional yogic powers.
They classify these abilities as tricks requiring significant training and claim that intense effort can eventually enable one to mesmerize people for the purpose, linking yogic practice directly to developing hypnotic ability for control.
Okay. Let's turn now to how the source describes Brahmanism, focusing on its practices and alleged underlying theology as presented here.
Right. The author presents a view of Brahmanism that heavily emphasizes physical mortifications and austerities as central to the path. Extreme asceticism.
Figures like fakirs and nirvanis, are given as examples of these extreme practices.
Yes, the source highlights these individuals as those who practice extreme austerities and self-inflicted tortures. This is described as sometimes involving minimal sleep and food, with practitioners existing in a state of ecstatic contemplation. The source notes that these practices had allegedly become unusually severe centuries before the era of the book's writing.
And the source characterizes Brahmanism itself, the system, as a theocratic tyranny. How does it justify that label?
It claims the caste system within Brahmanism is used as a mechanism to control the masses. This is allegedly justified by the Brahmins by presenting it as a likeness of divinity.
How so?
Specifically drawing a comparison between the Brahmins and Zeus, or Brahma, seen as the god who creates, acts, and directs, contrasting this with Zeus, who is sovereign but depicted as taking no direct action himself. So the Brahmins are positioned as the active directors, justifying their rule.
And there's an alleged incentive that drives individuals to become fakirs within this system. Why would someone choose that extreme path?
The source claims the Brahmins propagated the belief that anyone who consented to enroll among the high initiates of the pagoda and, crucially, to die for the faith, would be immediately transported to Brahma's abode upon death.
A shortcut to paradise, basically.
Exactly. This, according to the source, allowed them to bypass further transmigration on Earth or passage through hell, providing a constant supply of fakirs willing to undergo these severe practices.
Magic practices are also mentioned in relation to Brahmanism in the source. It keeps coming back to magic and occultism.
Yes, the source discusses the practice of evoking spirits, claiming that some spirits are evoked preferentially because they are apparently more willing to comply with requirements. It also notes an alleged intimate connection between the doctrine of the ancient Jewish Kabbalists and that of the Hindu votaries of the Pitras, or spirits.
Kabbalists and Hindu spirit veneration linked.
That's the claim here, stating that the Agrachata Pariksha is considered their scientific book. The common stock in trade of a magician is also mentioned various drugs, ingredients, and implements used in these practices.
The Upnakhat is referenced as a standard book on magic in this context.
Yes, the source refers to the Upnakhat as a standard Indian text on magic in their view. It's said to contain detailed descriptions of methods for inducing catalepsy, somnambulism, hallucination, and ecstasy.
How are these states achieved, according to the text?
Allegedly through strength of will and fatigue of the nervous system, the source broadly classifies this as yogi stuff, primarily based on breathing exercises or pranayama.
The source then delves into the worship of Shiva, calling it the most popular deity, particularly in Bengal at the time. How is that worship described?
The source describes the most popular representation of Shiva as the linga. It describes it as a smooth stone rising out of another stone of finer texture and uses Latin phrases.
Simulacrum membri virilis et pudendum molibre.
Right, indicating it represents the male and female reproductive organs. This emblem, the source states, is identical with Shiva in his capacity of Lord of all.
And Benares is mentioned.
Yes, Benares is highlighted as a major center of this worship, with numerous lingas visited by pilgrims. The source links this worship to ancient practices, claiming it involved cruel, bloodthirsty rites, and represents the emblem of the generative power. Again, this description is drawn directly from the source material.
And Shiva's consort, Durga, Kali, or Mahakali, is also described, the destructive aspect.
Yes. This figure is presented as the Sakti spouse or energetic will of Shiva, representing the destructive power. The source draws a striking analogy between her and destructive figures from Western traditions like Moloch, Typhon, Saturn, Dis, and Pluto, equating her with those figures.
The worship of Shiva or Vishnu is said to have led to the formation of distinct sects, people choosing one over the other.
Yes, the source claims that as the attributes of the Supreme Being began to be viewed as distinct individuals or deities, people attached themselves to the worship of one or the other exclusively, organizing themselves into sects focused on either Shiva or Vishnu.
Now, the worship of Sakti, or power, involves particularly unsettling claims in the source material, linking it to human sacrifice. This sounds very dark.
This is a deeply disturbing part of the source, yes. It alleges that Sakti worship sometimes involved human sacrifice, specifically linking it to the Thuggis, who are described as Kali's priests.
The thugs, right.
Kali, or Bhavani, said to be born from Shiva's eye, is portrayed as an evil spirit who delights in human blood and presides over plague and war. While sacrifices of cocks and bullocks are mentioned, the source emphasizes the role of the thugs in quenching the never-ending thirst of this divine vampire.
Wow, divine vampire.
The roles of specific Kali worshippers, Sahibzada, Luka, and Belhal, are also detailed. Again, these are presented as claims from within the source.
And the ceremonies for Sakti worship themselves are described as requiring a specific kind of participant.
The source claims the principal Sakti worship ceremonies, which comprehend the worship of Sakti, or power, require the presence of a young and beautiful girl as the living representative of the goddess.
A living representative.
Yes. It is said to be celebrated mostly in mixed society, and the source adds, quite disturbingly, that the girl must be calculated to fulfill with satisfaction the requirements of the sect. Again, these are claims presented within the source material, and they are quite graphic in implication.
Right. The source ties Sakti worship back to symbolism related to generative power, doesn't it?
Yes, the adoration of power is said to be typified by the yoni, the arga, and by the leaves and flowers of certain plants believed to resemble these forms. And the author reiterates their earlier note, explicitly stating again that sex power is equated with kundalini, electromagnetic force, astral light, and fire. They keep drawing that connection.
So, summing up the source's view on popular Hindu dogmas at the time, what's the takeaway?
The source concludes that phallicism, Linga Puja, the adoration of the phallus, combined with power worship, which it explicitly equates with Gnosticism, constitutes one of the most popular dogmas of the Hindus today, or at the time of writing. It briefly mentions the Maharaja sect and crimes allegedly committed in honor of Kali.
Okay, now let's shift focus to Judaism, specifically the Pharisees, the Talmud, and the Kabbalah, as portrayed in this source. And again, this section contains some of the most sensitive and controversial claims. It's critical to reiterate that these are presented as claims within this specific source material and nowhere else.
Absolutely understood. Constant vigilance on attribution here. The source focuses on the rise of the Pharisees to a position of supremacy after the destruction of the temple by Titus.
It claims the Pharisaic tradition faced initial challenges but then grew in influence. How did they achieve that, according to this text?
Yes. The source states that while the Pharisee tradition initially had serious difficulties, the Pharisees gained the confidence of their compatriots by taking the lead in the religious movement. They did this by emphasizing scrupulous observance of the law and instituting complicated rituals. Public piety, essentially.
Okay, but there was something else going on.
Simultaneously, the source claims they were cultivating the new doctrine in their secret sanctuaries, which it describes as regular secret societies. So, a public face and a secret inner circle.
Secret societies within Pharisaism.
That's the claim. The source notes their numbers, allegedly starting with a few hundred and reaching about 6,000 at their peak, according to Josephus, as cited by the source.
This group is characterized as intellectual pantheists by the source. What does that mean in this context?
The source describes them as such, claiming they were soon to acquire a directing influence over the Jewish nation. The source makes a strong assertion that outwardly their doctrines did not appear to offend national sentiment. They looked traditionally observant.
But inwardly.
However, within this alleged secret doctrine, they are claimed to have preserved their ethnic pride and conceived of the religion of man divinized, supposedly absorbed during the Babylonian exile.
Man divinized.
But applying it solely as applying to the prophet of the Jew, the superior and predestined being. This, according to the source, was accompanied by promises of universal dominion. It is absolutely crucial to understand that these are extremely controversial claims presented within this specific source material about the Pharisees and their alleged secret doctrine and aims. This is highly charged material presented by the author.
Understood. Extremely controversial and presented solely as the author's claims. And this is where the source presents a collection of statements it attributes directly to the Talmud. We must be extremely careful here and state clearly, again, that these are presented as quotes from the Talmud by this source material, not as verified facts by us.
Indeed. Utmost caution. The source presents several statements which it attributes to the Talmud, characterizing them collectively as a horrible moral code. We will read some examples verbatim as they appear in the source material, emphasizing repeatedly that these are the claims, interpretations, and presented quotes of this source, occult theocracy. Ready?
Ready. Let's be clear. Verbatim from the source, attributed by the source to the Talmud.
Okay. The source presents this quote: "Those who do not own Torah and the prophets must all be killed. Who has power to kill them? Let him kill them openly with the sword. If not, let him use artifices till they are done away with." That's one.
Okay, next.
Another quote attributed to the Talmud by the source is, If a Goy killed a Goy or a Jew, he is responsible. But if a Jew killed a Goy, he is not responsible.
All right, continue.
The source also quotes what it claims is from the Talmud. To communicate anything to a Goy about our religious relations would be equal to the killing of all the Jews, for if they knew what we think of them, they would mass together against us and would do us great harm.
Keep going.
And this one, again, presented by the source as a quote. One should and must make false oath when the Goys ask if our books contain anything against them. Then we are bound to state on oath that there is nothing like that.
Okay.
The source presents this as a Talmudic quote. Every Goy who studies Talmud and every Jew who helps him in it ought to die.
And one more example from this section.
And finally, among the examples given in this section of the source, the ears of the Goys are filthy. Their baths, houses, countries are filthy. Again, these are presented verbatim from the source material as quotes and claims attributed to the Talmud by the author of Occult Theocracy. We are simply reporting what the source says.
Understood. Reporting the source's claims. And the source's own interpretation of these presented quotes is, unsurprisingly, quite severe.
The author describes this collection as a horrible moral code, specifically designed, in their view, to make easier the strife with foreigners to their own nation. They claim this code was deliberately kept secret from non-Jews.
And the source also claims the Jewish sages viewed Christ's teachings as a direct threat to their alleged plans for dominance.
Yes, the source asserts that the Jewish sages understood that Christ's teachings, which emphasized brotherly feelings and the equality of all people before God, fundamentally challenged the idea of hatred towards foreign nations. According to the source, they saw this as denying the Jews what the author describes as their privileged position as masters of the world. So Christ's message was seen as undermining this alleged goal.
The Kabbalah reappears in this section as well, linked to this secret doctrine.
It does. Here, the Kabbalah is mentioned once more as containing the secret Jewish doctrine. The source notes that Josephus's history of the Jews lacks this secret doctrine, making it difficult, according to this author, to fully trace Jewish history before a certain point without considering the Kabbalah. It's positioned as the key to the real story.
Okay. Now let's connect this back to the idea of a universal screen. The source claims Freemasonry took on this role after a certain point in history, building on the earlier points about initiation.
Right. The source reinforces the idea that hypnotic control and fear were involved in Masonic initiation, as we discussed earlier, framing it as a key element in maintaining secrecy and control. It claims that after the adoption of the Anderson Constitution in 1723, Masonry became an avowed organization.
More public.
Yes, and began serving as a universal screen behind which all secret societies, whether theurgic or political, would operate clandestinely. The 3 philanthropic and altruistic degrees, the public face of Masonry, are said to have had no apparent real secret, allegedly masking deeper activities happening in the higher, more secret grades. A front, basically.
And this is where the Illuminati of Bavaria, founded in 1776 by Adam Weishaupt, enters the source's narrative as a prime example operating behind this screen.
Exactly. The source introduces the Illuminati and describes its alleged structure, ranging from the initial Minerval degree up to the highest Areopagite degree. It also notes a claimed resemblance between the Illuminati and the Order of the Golden Cross.
And the source makes a highly controversial claim about the true power allegedly behind the Illuminati. This sounds familiar.
Yes, this is another extremely sensitive claim made in the source, echoing the earlier themes. The source asserts that behind the Illuminati figure Nikolai was Moses Mendelssohn, and that behind Mendelssohn was the Jewish Kahal, the Jewish International World Government. Again, it is absolutely essential to frame this as a claim made strictly within this specific source material, not as a statement of fact from us. It's part of the source's consistent narrative thread.
Understood. Consistent narrative from the source. Weishaupt's stated intention for the Illuminati is described by the source as being quite specific, though, separate from that claim.
According to the source, yes. Weishaupt's explicit goal in founding the Illuminati was presented as creating a Protestant organization to fight Jesuitism using Jesuitical methods. It's framed as a strategic counter-movement within the Christian context of the time.
Using their enemies' methods against them. And how did the Illuminati allegedly propagate their ideas, according to this text?
The source claims they used means such as a literary review established by Nicola to spread what are called pernicious doctrines of a shallow Illuminism, undermining traditional thought through literature.
And they had support.
This effort was allegedly supported by prominent figures of the time, like the critic Lessing, Through his irreligious essays, according to the source.
The source also brings in the Band of Virtue, Tugendbund, and describes a particular social gathering associated with it. What was that about?
Right, the source mentions the Tugendbund and describes Henrietta Hertz's salon in very critical terms, calling it a Midianite tent.
A Midianite tent.
Yeah, a biblical reference implying moral laxity. It alleges that a number of young Jewish women whose husbands were away assembled there alongside Christian profligates. Figures like Frederick von Gentz, described by the source in strongly negative language, mercenary, depraved, are mentioned as being part of this circle.
Mirabeau is there too.
The presence of Mirabeau is also noted, and the source references the historian Gratz for the claim that Mirabeau allegedly received significant financial help from the Jews during his secret diplomatic mission to Berlin. These are presented as claims and descriptions drawn directly from the source material, including the negative characterizations.
After the Tugendbund was dissolved, the source claims its members moved into other groups. They didn't just disappear.
No, according to the source, the members of the dissolved Tugendbund swelled the ranks of other existing or newly forming societies. It lists groups like the Black Knights under John, the Knights of the Queen of Prussia, and the Concordists under Dr. Lang as receiving these members. They just shifted allegiance.
The source then makes a direct link from Illuminism to the preparation of revolution, specifically focusing on the French Revolution. This is a common theme in conspiracy literature.
It is, and the source leans into it heavily. It cites the Swiss writer Gertner, described as an ex-Freemason, who allegedly stated that from 1786, a propaganda club operated in Paris with prominent chiefs, including the Duc de la Rochefoucauld, Condorcet, and C.S.
A propaganda club? What was its alleged aim?
The alleged aim of this organization is stated by the source as the triumph of dogmatic atheism and the deliberate creation of a great social upheaval, revolution, basically. The source mentions the large alleged membership of 50,000 and the rapidly increasing funds available to this club.
And the conspiracy to overthrow Louis VI is tied into this narrative, featuring Philippe of Orleans.
According to the source, yes. The conspiracy led by Philippe of Orleans to overthrow King Louis VI was directed by Sillery Mirabeau. The source highlights the large number of Freemason deputies in the Tiers Etat, claiming 477 out of 605 were Freemasons, suggesting this facilitated the conspiracy from within the system.
The cost of revolutions is mentioned Lord de Pitt's gold, and Lafayette is also placed within this alleged plotting.
Right. The source notes that revolutions require significant funding, referencing Lord de Pitt. It claims Lafayette, who famously led the National Guardsmen to Versailles and brought the king back to Paris, was presumably fully informed of Dupont's plan for revolution.
A plan approved beforehand.
This plan, according to the source, had allegedly been approved by Lafayette and Mirabeau at a session of a group called the Amis Réunis early in June, placing him right in the middle of the alleged conspiracy.
The source even questions the validity of the vote that condemned Louis VI to death, doesn't it? Suggesting irregularities.
It does. It points out that the death penalty was carried by a majority of just one vote, but then claims that due to certain irregularities in the balloting process, approximately 5 votes for death were invalidated. Had they been correctly counted, according to this account, it would have changed the outcome of the vote, casting doubt on the legitimacy of the execution.
Before leaving this segment on Illuminism and revolution, the source briefly lists other historical groups it sees as manifestations of Gnosticism, connecting back to that earlier theme.
Right, just reels them off. The Albigenses, the Moravian Brethren, the Anabaptists, the Baptists, the Quakers, the Waldenses, the Shakers, and the Methodists.
That's a very diverse list. What's the point?
The author's point in listing these seems to be to show a recurring pattern throughout history, suggesting Gnosticism keeps reappearing in different guises. The source notes that while individual sects may rise, fall, or fade away, God remains, implying these are transient human efforts against something eternal.
Okay. Our journey through this source's claims brings us now to 2 pivotal figures in its alleged underworld, Giuseppe Mazzini and Albert Pike, and the concept of palladism. These names keep popping up.
They are central figures in this narrative, yes. The source introduces Mazzini and claims he devised a plan to bring about the unification of Freemasonry under a single controlling authority, a central command.
How would that work?
This was to be achieved, allegedly, by creating a secret supreme right and a central universal direction that would be governed by a small, carefully selected group of high-ranking Masons. Top-down control.
And Albert Pike was presented as Mazzini's chosen partner in this endeavor, the American Connection.
Yes. According to the source, Albert Pike was selected by Mazzini for this critical role. The source provides a brief overview of Pike's background. Born in Boston, attended Harvard, worked as a lawyer, served as a Confederate general during the American Civil War, and rose rapidly through the Masonic ranks to become the sovereign Grand Commander of the Supreme Council at Charleston, South Carolina.
What was the alleged division of power in the Pike-Mazzini plan? Who did what?
The source claims the plan allocated dogmatic authority to Pike, giving him the title of Sovereign Pontiff of Universal Freemasonry, the Pope of Masonry, essentially. Mazzini, on the other hand, was to hold executive authority as the sovereign chief of political action.
Doctrine versus action.
Right. Pike was allegedly tasked by Mazzini with drawing up the statutes for this proposed supreme secret rite, which would serve as the liturgic bonds uniting the members of this centralized high masonry. Pike wrote the rulebook, basically.
This is where palladism, or new reformed palladism, comes into the picture. What is that, according to the source?
Palladism is described as this international rite, the vehicle for their plan, with its Supreme Council located at Charleston, where Pike was based. The source claims it drew members from other rites for recruitment, but intended to primarily recruit initiates from the ancient and accepted Scottish rite who are already identified as being addicted to occultism, targeting a specific type.
And what is the alleged religion of palladism, as laid out in the source? What did they supposedly believe?
The source is quite explicit here. It claims the Palladian religion is a form of Manichaean neo-Gnosticism, teaching a dual divinity. Back to duality again.
Okay, and the two divinities are?
According to this doctrine as described in the source, Lucifer is considered the equal of Adonai, who the source identifies as the god of Christians. Lucifer is presented in this alleged doctrine as the god of light and goodness struggling for humanity against Adonai, the god of darkness and evil.
Another complete inversion. Lucifer is good, God is evil.
That's the claim made about palladism here. The source asserts that by stating this central principle of the secret cult, Albert Pike effectively unveiled the dogmas of the high creeds of all other masonries, implying this was the hidden truth all along.
The source includes a widely circulated quote that it attributes directly to Albert Pike, allegedly revealing this doctrine to high-degree Masons. This quote is pretty infamous.
Yes, it is often cited, and the source presents the following verbatim quote, attributing it to Albert Pike and addressed to high-degree Masons. To you, Sovereign Grand Inspectors General, we say this, that you may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degrees. The Masonic religion should be, by all of us, initiates of the high degrees, maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine.
The purity of the Luciferian doctrine. Wow.
The source immediately follows this with a rhetorical question attributed to this context. If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, the God of the Christians, whose deeds prove his cruelty, perfidy, and hatred? It trails off there, but the implication is clear. It is critical to note that this quote and the subsequent question are presented exactly as they appear in the source material as being associated with Albert Pike and this alleged doctrine. Its authenticity is heavily debated elsewhere, but this is what the source claims.
Understood. Attributed by the source. This section also contains a truly fantastical description of a supposed wireless telephone allegedly used by Masonic leaders. This sounds like something out of science fiction.
It really does. This bizarre detail comes from a book by Bataille, which the source cites, originally printed in 1894. It describes an elaborate instrument used for communication between distant Masonic chiefs.
What did it look like?
It allegedly involved golden statuettes representing the Grand Central Directories in Washington, named Ignis, Naples, Ratio, Montevideo, Emancipatio, and Calcutta, Felicitas. It included a small silver bell for listening, a mouthpiece, and a silver toad that emitted harmless flames, all housed in a box called an Arcula Mystica.
A mystical box with statues and a flaming toad.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the alleged communication method. How did this wireless telephone work?
According to the description in the source, if the supreme dogmatical chief, like Pike in Charleston, wished to speak with the head of political action, like Lemmy in Rome, another key figure we'll get to, he would press his finger on the statuettes for Ignis, representing Charleston, Washington, and Ratio, representing Naples, Rome.
Press the statues.
These would sync, causing a strong whistling sound in the distant chief's office in Rome. That chief would open their box, see the corresponding sunk statuettes in flames from the toad, indicating who was calling. They would then press down their corresponding statuette, and conversation would allegedly proceed by speaking into the mouthpiece and holding the silver bell to the ear.
Like a magical intercom system.
Pretty much. Each sovereign grand master of a directory allegedly carried one of these Arcula Mysticas when traveling. The source even mentions Bleichroder and Findel as holding positions in the Berlin Directory and having such a box. Again, this is presented strictly as a description from a book cited by the source, Bataille's book. It sounds incredibly fanciful.
It really does. The source offers a somewhat ambiguous characterization of Albert Pike himself, despite making these huge claims about him.
It does. It notes that with a man of Pike's type, one never knows just what to think. The source mentions that his memory is associated with a great number of exaggerated legends. So, some acknowledgement of myth-making.
But it also makes a negative claim.
Yes, it also makes the claim that he was allegedly rescued from justice by Masonic lodges at some point, adding to the secretive, potentially criminal portrayal.
Moving to more concrete allegations presented in the source, the alleged murder of William Morgan is detailed as evidence of the lengths these groups would supposedly go to maintain secrecy. This is a famous incident in anti-Masonic history.
It is. This event is presented as a well-known historical fact in the source, although the source claims the full details only came to light later. The source recounts that in 1826, William Morgan, who had achieved a high position in Masonry, planned to publish a book exposing the secrets of the order.
Betraying the oath.
Exactly. As a result, according to this account, he was arrested on a false charge and moved through various locations by Masons, eventually being taken to Fort Niagara.
What was the alleged initial plan for Morgan at Fort Niagara? Were they going to kill him immediately?
According to the source, his captors initially hoped that their brother Masons of Canada would assist them in disposing of him. The specific plan was allegedly to send him among the Indian tribes in the northwest of Canada. The source claims outright murder was not the first intention.
But the Canadian Masons reportedly refused to be involved.
Yes, the source states that after much deliberation, the Canadian Masons refused to become parties to the scheme. They wouldn't take him. Consequently, the American Masons involved returned him to Fort Niagara.
And this led to his alleged death. How did it happen, according to the source?
The source claims that a few days later, a large number of high-ranking Masons assembled nearby to open an encampment of Knight Templars. The source states rather cryptically that the additional power of the sealed obligation being necessary for what followed.
Sealed obligation.
Okay. Morgan was subsequently drowned in the Niagara River. That's the claim.
The source concludes this story with a pointed observation about justice and secrecy, doesn't it?
It does. It states that none of the individuals allegedly involved in the murder were ever brought to justice, followed by the exclamation, "So much for the oath of secrecy and brotherhood." The source adds the comment that nowadays, greater precautions are observed, implying such things might still happen, just more carefully.
Chilling implication. The source also discusses what it calls feminine annexes, or lodges of adoption, female branches of Masonry.
Yes. It claims that in many cases where a masculine lodge has a feminine annex, its existence is completely ignored by the majority of the brothers of the main lodge, hidden even from rank-and-file Masons.
And female members have limited access.
Allegedly, they can only visit other lodges after they have attained the 5th degree. The source quotes a recommendation from a lodge master suggesting the creation of lodges of adoption, arguing they are essential for training Masons to be masters of themselves through natural ordeals, drawing a contrast with the enforced celibacy of priests, suggesting some kind of sexual element or test.
There's also a claimed ruse to suppress investigation into these female lodges. How does that supposedly work?
The source alleges that from time to time, a semi-initiate is encouraged to propose a resolution for the establishment of feminine lodges. A petition is then drawn up and sent to the governing Grand Orients or Supreme Councils, where, according to the source, it is then stifled, deliberately shut down. The source quotes an alleged statement from a Grand Master saying that female lodges, if established, must be irregular and function entirely outside of Masonry proper, unrecognized by Grand Orients and Supreme Councils, suggesting a deliberate strategy of plausible deniability, keeping them officially separate.
The claim that Masonic symbolism is borrowed from the Kabbalah is brought up again here, briefly.
Yes. The source mentions an attempt by a figure named Ragon to demonstrate to his fellow Masons that Masonic symbolism is borrowed from the Kabbalah. According to the source, Ragon argued this connection revealed the true purpose for which the association was founded, but the source states no one believed him at the time. His insights were ignored.
Okay. Let's turn now to Adriano Lemmi, who the source presents as a key figure consolidating power after Mazzini. He seems important in this narrative.
Very. The source introduces Adriano Lemmi as Mazzini's successor in leading this alleged underworld. It refers to him as the little Jew and quotes Mazzini as describing Lemmy positively, noting his cleverness at choosing men and his ability to inspire energy. This description and quote, including the ethnic identifier, are presented exactly as they appear in the source.
Understood. Lemmy is also allegedly linked to political violence and insurrections, following Mazzini's path.
The source claims that after 1851, Lemmy began playing a significant role in all politico-Masonic assassinations and all the popular insurrections that occurred in Italy, placing him at the center of political turmoil.
There's a very dramatic and specific story in the source about an alleged plot involving Crispy's poisoning and resurrection. This sounds theatrical.
It's a remarkable narrative recounted in the source material, yes. It claims that Francesco Crispi, a major Italian political figure, allegedly betrayed Mazzini and sold himself out.
So, consequences follow.
As a consequence, according to this story, he was poisoned. But then Mazzini allegedly appeared, administered a counterpoison, effectively saved, and reborn Crispy, like a near-death initiation.
And then?
Following this, under the threat of a second time, Mazzini allegedly commanded Crispy to obey their will in all things, to fight against royalty and the church, even if his actions made him appear completely a madman to the rest of Europe, binding him to their cause through fear and this dramatic event. This is presented strictly as a story found within the source material.
Mazzini and his circle are also linked to the founding of various young nationalist groups across Europe.
Yes, the source lists several of these groups as allegedly founded by Mazzini and his associates. Young Italy, Young Europe, Young Switzerland, Young Ireland, and Young Germany, along with the founding dates as presented in the source. It also includes the specific oath from the Young Italy section, quoted verbatim as it appears in the source, showing a network of revolutionary groups.
Lemmy is also accused of profiting from war, according to the source, not just ideology.
Right. The source claims Lemmy used the War of 1859 to enrich himself through ambulance contracts for the Crimea campaign. He allegedly pocketed a large sum of the money, paid the rest with bad checks, and fled to Malta.
A war profiteer.
The source explicitly labels this his first big theft and notes he was condemned by default as a result, painting him as corrupt from early on. These are presented as claims from the source.
The source brings Disraeli, the British Prime Minister, into this narrative, particularly in relation to young England. How does he fit?
The source discusses Disraeli, highlighting his persistent debts and questioning who his masters truly were, suggesting that individuals in such financial straits are rarely their own masters. It implies he might have been controlled.
Any specific claims?
It mentions Disraeli's father's refusal to take on the leadership of their sect as offered by the Jews of London, and questions whether this leadership was then offered to Disraeli himself. It also quotes AAB in the Evening Standard, stating that Disraeli's wife, Mary Ann, allegedly ruled the underworld of secret societies, and suggests searching there for the invisible masters pulling the strings. These are presented as claims, questions, and quoted opinions found within the source.
The source also includes a quote from Metternich, the Austrian statesman, cited via the Encyclopedia Britannica, that links several seemingly disparate groups.
Right. The source quotes Metternich as grouping together German secret societies, the Italian Carbonaria, and the attempts of the English to pass the Reform Bill, describing them collectively as instances of evil sought for its own sake. Just pure disruption.
And the connection.
The source then points out that the Reform Bill mentioned was a measure associated with Disraeli, linking his political work to this alleged international network of evil. This is presented as, quote, cited within the source.
There's also a claim about the death of Ferdinand II, King of Naples, allegedly by poison, another assassination.
That's the claim from the source material. It claims Ferdinand II was poisoned. It states that Crispy, described again as a tool of Lemmy, was in London when the news of the king's death arrived at the International Masonic Committee.
And who allegedly did it?
Mazzini's alleged tool in this poisoning is identified as Monsignor Caputo, described as a priest, the king's confessor, a Freemason, and a sublime maître parfait, a high-ranking Mason within the church, allegedly. This is presented as a claim from the source material.
These events are connected by the source to the capture of Rome in 1870, a major event in Italian unification.
Yes, the source links these alleged events directly to the capture of Rome by Cadorna, declaring dramatically the sacrifice was accomplished, Freemasonry had triumphed. It also mentions the role of Gambetta in France, identifying him as a Freemason, sublime maître parfait, and acting as an arbitrary master during his dictatorship. Painting these national events as Masonic victories, these connections and claims are presented as they appear in the source.
Lemmy's alleged primary goal in Italy was the unification of Italian Masonry under his authority. He wanted to consolidate power.
Yes, according to the source. It claims Lemmy sought to consolidate his secret superior authority by eliminating the various independent supreme councils in Italy, aiming for complete unity under his leadership. One man in charge.
How did he supposedly do it?
His alleged methods are described as slow, deliberate maneuvering, secrecy, and importantly, using the power of gold, buying loyalty or silencing opposition. The source claims that complaints sent to the Supreme Directory at Charleston regarding Lemmy's actions were suppressed by Phileas Walder, who allegedly shared in the profits, thus keeping Pike unaware and maintaining his trust in Lemmy. Internal corruption protecting Lemmy. These are presented as claims from the source.
The concept of traveling brothers is mentioned as a method for secret initiation of high-ranking individuals. What's that about?
Yes, the source describes traveling brothers as a mechanism for secretly initiating high-rank persons. This method allegedly ensured that the initiation was known to only a very limited number of top officials, serving the purpose of strict secrecy, keeping the circle very small for important recruits.
The source also summarizes the declarations that allegedly came out of Lemmy's congresses. What was on their agenda, according to this text?
It lists declarations concerning social questions, the goal of winning workers' rights, and combating clerical influence. Specific measures allegedly declared include enforcing existing laws for the suppression of religious congregations and preventing evasion, promulgating laws related to the property of religious bodies, specifically confiscation.
Seizing church property.
That's the claim. Also, suppressing all religious instruction in public schools and creating schools for young girls where they would be protected from clerical influence, a clear anti-clerical agenda as presented here. These are presented as declarations summarized from the source material.
Was there opposition to Lemmy's consolidation of power? Did anyone try to stop him?
Yes, the source mentions that in 1889, the Mother Lodge Archimede formed the Masonic Federation of the Independent Lodges of Italy in an attempt to resist Lemmy's alleged control.
And what happened?
The source claims Lemmy was perturbed, but ultimately succeeded in crushing the secession effort by using the power of gold, providing an example of sending a secret agent with money to buy off opponents. Money talks, essentially. These are presented as claims from the source.
This section contains a particularly significant and highly controversial claim about an alleged alliance and control structure, referring to a Jewish secret federation. Again, extreme caution needed here.
Absolutely. Maximum caution and constant attribution to the source only. The source alleges that Albert Pike granted permission to Jewish Freemasons to form a secret society operating parallel to the regular lodges.
A separate, parallel organization?
Yes. This group was called the Sovereign Patriarchal Council, allegedly centered in Hamburg. According to the source, this council collected vast sums of money annually, described as being used for general Jewish propaganda.
And there was a formal agreement.
The source claims there was an alleged treaty between B'nai B'rith, a well-known Jewish service organization, and the Charleston Authority, Pike's group, and that Albert Pike and the Jew Armand Levy affixed their Palladian signatures to this document. These are presented solely as claims made within the specific source material about an alleged alliance and control mechanism. This is a core element of the conspiracy theory presented in this text.
And this leads directly to a claim about a plot and ultimate secret Jewish control over international Masonry.
Yes, following that logic. The source claims that plans were devised in Jewish lodges to manipulate public opinion in favor of Lemmy's rise to power. The source frames the outcome as the result of a plot by the Sovereign Patriarchal Council of Hamburg against Pike's Supreme Dogmatic Directory of Charleston, Hamburg versus Charleston.
And who won, according to this account?
The source states that Hamburg ultimately won, thereby assuring the secret Jewish control of the powerful machine of international Masonry. It alleges that the Jewish lodges acted as willing tools for Lemmy and claims that 50,000 Masons were simultaneously members of both Palladism and these Jewish lodges, creating a massive overlap. Again, these are presented solely as claims made within the specific source material.
The events of the 1893 convention for transferring the Universal Center are presented as a direct consequence of this alleged plot, the culmination.
Yes. The source describes American Masons as being overconfident about the outcome of the convention. Lemmy, presented as the chief organizer of the event, suddenly decreed Rome as the chosen city for the convention. Surprise move.
And the result?
As a result, Rome was elected the Universal Center and Lemmy became the Supreme Grand Master. The source then lists the 7 alleged sovereign grand masters of the world, providing their locations, titles, and Kabbalistic associations as detailed in the source material. Din 476 at London, Tefereth 1255 at Paris, Netzach 1165 at Alexandria, Had 816 at Madrid, Isad 1152 at Valparaiso, Malkuth 697 in Belgium, and Malkuth 1205 at Rome, laying out the alleged global structure.
The source's conclusion to this specific narrative is quite pointed, summing up this whole section.
Extremely pointed. The source concludes this section by stating, international masonry under Lemmy becomes satanic and Jewish, immediately followed by the phrase, international Jewry has much to explain. These are presented as conclusions explicitly stated by the source material. It's a direct accusation.
The source also references several authors and books it claims expose these alleged activities, suggesting others knew about this.
It does. It lists individuals and their works that it presents as having brought these murders to light, including Diana Vaughan, Leo Taxil, Domenico Margiata, Dr. Bataille, A. de la Rave, and Paul Rosen, presenting them as whistleblowers or exposers.
And it claims there's been a deliberate policy of suppression regarding these purported revelations, a cover-up.
Yes, the source asserts that to implement a policy of suppression, these revelations were ignored or dismissed. It cites the Encyclopedia of Religion and Ethics as omitting any reference to Satanism before 1880 and dismissing the exposures as the work of 2 notorious romancers, Leo Taxil and Bataille.
Calling them liars, basically.
Right. The source calls this dismissal a curious effort to eliminate historical phases concerning Albert Pike and Giuseppe Mazzini from official accounts, suggesting deliberate historical revisionism. These are presented as claims made within the source about the reception and alleged suppression of these purported exposures.
Finally, regarding Lemmy, the source includes a strange anecdote about a discovery allegedly made in his rented apartment after his death. What was that?
It's a weird little story. The source recounts that after Lemmy's death, the proprietor of the premises, Prince Borghese, insisted on gaining entry to a specific room in the rented apartment in Rome, even threatening to force the door. He wanted in.
And what did they find?
When entry was finally granted, the visitors allegedly discovered a curious throne, which is described as that of the great satanic pontiff. The source claims the site plunged the visitors into a state of terror, causing them to retreat hastily without further examination, leaving this tantalizing hint of dark ritual objects. This is presented as a story found within the source material.
Moving into the source's claims regarding an interlocking directorate, and specifically allegations concerning the Jesuits, the net widens.
Yes, the scope expands here. The source discusses the alleged reorganization of this super-right under the general name of Illuminism, which it links to the Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia, SRIA, an English Rosicrucian Masonic group. It also mentions that photostatic copies of patents of the Ancient Order of Oriental Templars, OTO, from 1902, are shown in the book, linking these groups together.
The source presents a particular view of how British Masonry fits into this alleged structure. How are they involved, according to this text?
It claims that within regular British Masonic lodges, there are members of other, more secret rites. But British Masons are allegedly, quote, deliberately taught contemptuously to refuse to acknowledge these other rites as legitimately Masonic, a kind of internal firewall.
But these members exist. What do they do?
According to the source, these members of other rites act as recruiting sergeants for the secret societies, selecting potential initiates from the regular lodges who appear likely to serve their objectives. Talent spotting. The source adds that even if a man in the higher grades proves difficult to control, he can still progress along the track pre-established for him to the highest visible point of initiation, but the true control remains unseen. You can climb the ladder but still be managed from behind the curtain.
The source highlights alleged connections between prominent figures across different groups as evidence of this interlocking structure. Who are they talking about?
Yes, it points to specific individuals and their claimed affiliations across various organizations, citing letters as evidence. It names William Wynne Westcott, a prominent English Mason with numerous titles.
Right.
Junior Grand Deacon, head of the SRIA and the Golden Dawn, another famous magical order. Secretary of the Rite of Swedenborg. Knight Kadosh in the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, ANASR. Grand Standard Bearer in the Royal Arch, and Regent of the Illuminati. A very busy man, allegedly.
And connected to others.
The source states Westcott was on intimate terms with Theodor Reuss, one of the alleged founders of the Illuminati in Germany. Reuss himself is listed with many titles. Magus Supremus of the Esoteric Rosicrucians, outer head of the OTO, and Sovereign Grand Master General of the Ancient Rites of Memphis and Mizraim. John Yarker is also named, with a long list of Masonic offices, described as a correspondent with Rus and a delegate for Martinism and the Swedenborg Rite, weaving a web of connections between these key figures. These alleged connections and affiliations are presented as detailed within the source material.
The Order of the Jesuits is also introduced, as described by the source, within this broader context. How do they fit into this picture?
The source describes the Jesuits as having extremely strict rules, with members bound by vows of blind obedience to their head, known as the General, who, it notes, claims authority from the Pope.
The fourth vow is noted as particularly significant. What is that?
Yes. The source highlights the fourth vow of special allegiance to the Pope, which is taken specifically for missionary purposes, promising to travel in obedience to him whenever and wherever he commands. Dedication to papal missions.
The structure of the Jesuit government is described as highly centralized and controlled, according to the source, like a military organization.
Somewhat, yes. According to the source, provincials are required to report every 3 months to the general with detailed lists of members and activities. Local superiors must report directly and immediately for important matters. The source describes this as an elaborate system of espionage and delation,
Spying on each other.
where every inmate of a house is allegedly liable to secret accusation to their superior, contrasting this with older monastic practices of confessing faults openly. Internal surveillance, basically.
While checks on the general are mentioned, assistants, confessors, the source offers a caveat about their real power relative to the Pope.
Right. The source states there appear to be external checks provided. However, it notes that Jesuit power is often depicted as being short of practical submission to the Pope when the interests of the order diverge from the Pope's directives, implying they might follow their own agenda sometimes.
Alleged Jesuit influence in England is also touched upon, particularly during the Stuart period.
Yes. The source claims the Jesuits were heavily involved in scheming and intriguing in England during the reign of the Catholic King James II through their representatives, Father Saint Germain and Father Colombier. It notes their alleged decline after the Protestant succession was established on the English throne.
The source draws a parallel between the structure and rituals of Masonic and Jesuitic degrees. What's the similarity claimed?
It quotes Hecathorn, stating there is considerable analogy between Masonic and Jesuitic degrees. The source also notes the claim that Jesuits also tread down the shoe and bare the knee during rituals, similar to how Ignatius Loyola allegedly did when asking for confirmation of the order from the Pope. Shared ritual elements, supposedly.
Clandestine meetings called congregations are also mentioned in relation to the Jesuits.
Yes. The source describes these congregations as having been formed in Italy and France in 1563. They were allegedly clandestine meetings held in subterranean chapels and other secret places. These groups are described as having a sectarian organization with secret catechisms that were allegedly required to be surrendered before death, which the source notes is why very few copies remain. More secret groups within the group.
The source introduces a sweeping concept linking multiple traditions under one alleged theology. This seems like a grand unification theory of sorts.
It does. It refers to a Paris manuscript and presents the concept of a Jesuit, Judaic, Masonic, Gnostic, Brahmin, Illuminati theology as being contained within it, just throwing everything into one pot. This complex linkage of seemingly disparate traditions under a single alleged theological umbrella is presented as described in the source.
The alleged Jesuit initiation rituals are described in some detail, with a focus on the use of terror, similar to some other groups mentioned.
Yes, the source claims Jesuit initiation rituals employed terror and the apparatus of ancient mysteries. The neophyte was allegedly closely watched, and their progression through degrees was based on how well they handled fear, testing their nerve.
Can you describe the third degree prophecy as the source lays it out?
It's quite graphic. It's specifically described as taking place in the Cave of Evocation, also known as the Black Chamber, decorated with skulls and skeletons. The source claims priests watched the neophyte through trapdoors without their knowledge. If the candidate's behavior was deemed satisfactory, 2 brethren representing archangels would allegedly appear suddenly.
Then what?
They would bind the neophyte's forehead with a white band soaked with blood and covered with hieroglyphics, hang a small crucifix and a satchel of relics around their neck, take off their clothing and cast it on a pyre, and mark the body with numerous crosses drawn with blood. Then the hierophant and assistants would enter, give them a white garment, Bible, sword, cross, and ring, and an oath would be administered. a very intense, symbolic, and terrifying ritual as described here. This is presented solely as a description of alleged rituals found within the source material.
The source also mentions a controversial book titled Secret Instructions of the Society of Jesus. What about that?
It mentions this book, noting that the society allegedly repudiated it as spurious, a forgery. However, the source implies it may not be spurious, stating that it has been Jesuit policy to deny discreditable reports, casting doubt on the denial.
What's allegedly in the book?
The preface of this book allegedly warns superiors not to let it fall into the hands of strangers, as it might give them a bad opinion of the order. The source lists some of the chapter headings, such as instructions on how to found establishments, acquire the friendship of princes, deal with influential non-rich individuals, and provide hints to preachers and confessors of kings and great personages. Basically, a manual for gaining influence and power. This is presented as information found within the source.
And finally, the source includes a list of individuals who have held the office of Jesuit general, just listing the leadership lineage.
Yes, a list of the generals of the Society of Jesus is included in the material provided.
We've covered a remarkable amount of ground, connecting so many groups and figures. But the source brings in several other alleged influences and historical connections that are worth touching on briefly before we wrap up. Starting with the Defenders in Ireland. Who were they, according to this source?
The source describes the Defenders as a criminal association of lawbreakers and banditti, allegedly supported by the Irish Catholic element. It claims they carried out massacres of Protestants in 1641, but were ultimately crushed by Cromwell in 1649, a violent sectarian group in this portrayal. These are presented as claims from the source.
There's a claim about opposition from Archbishop Plunkett leading to his death. How did that supposedly happen?
The source alleges that Roman Catholic Archbishop Plunkett, later St. Oliver Plunkett, attempted to suppress the criminal association of Defenders in the south of Ireland. He was subsequently accused of treason, and the source claims that certain Irish priests who were members of the secret society and had been censured by him provided false evidence against him at his trial.
Leading to his execution.
Yes, resulting in his hanging despite his innocence, according to this account, blaming a secret society within the clergy for the death of a saint. This is presented as a claim from the source.
The AOH, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, is presented as a descendant of these groups, carrying on the legacy.
Yes, the source states that the AOH is the descendant of certain criminal organizations from the past, mentioning that their own historian admits this chain of descent. It suggests that Jesuit influence reinforced the Defenders' development and ritual.
Is it monolithic?
No, the source differentiates between the AOH of Ireland, which it describes as a powerful nationalist force hostile to extremism, and the Board of Erin AOH, presumably in America, which is described as revolutionary. These are presented as claims from the source.
Jansenism and the Camisards are also mentioned in the source, bringing us back to France.
Right. The source describes Jansenism as a peculiar form of Calvinism within Catholicism. The Camisards, Protestant rebels in the Cevennes region, are presented as a survival of the Waldenses and the Pastoreaux, described by an authority quoted by the source as exhibiting prophetic madness, ecstatic phenomena, and cataleptic symptoms, similar phenomena to those described in other contexts.
And these groups are linked back to the broader idea of Gnosticism's manifestations. It always comes back to Gnosticism.
Yes, the source states that the Camisards and the later Convulsionaires of Saint Médard in Paris were merely manifestations of Gnosticism. It claims such manifestations have consistently appeared in the esoteric branches of various sects, both religious and secret societies, ever since the days of paganism, seeing Gnosticism everywhere.
The Jacobites, supporters of the exiled Stuarts, are also mentioned in connection with early Masonic lodges in France. How did they supposedly use them?
The source claims that the Jacobites, who were partisans of the pretender to the British throne, found the newly established Masonic lodges in France to be useful venues for their ongoing plotting after Masonry was introduced there in the early 18th century, using lodges as cover for political conspiracy.
The Royal Order of Scotland gets a brief mention too.
Yes, it's listed as an order founded in 1750, consisting of 2 degrees, the Hereditary Grand Master, HRDM, and the Rosy Cross, RYCS, just another group in the mix.
The source attributes certain anarchist doctrine quotes to the Scottish Rite. This seems like a contradiction to Masonry's usual image.
It does. The source presents the following quotes, which it ascribes to the Scottish Rite. The 3 infamous assassins are law, property, and religion.
Why infamous?
The reasons given by the source are that law is not in harmony with individual social rights, property because the earth belongs to nobody and its fruits should belong to all proportionally, And religion because man who is free and has conscience cannot give away to any power, whether terrestrial or celestial, his rights. Presenting the right as holding radical anarchist views in this text. These are presented explicitly as quotes from the source, attributed by the source to the Scottish Rite.
The Rite of Zinzendorf and the Rite of Strict Observance are also listed among the various Masonic rites mentioned.
Yes, the Rite of Zinzendorf is mentioned as having been absorbed at the convent of Wolfenbüttel. The Rite of Strict Observance is noted for its claimed descent from the Knights Templar, a common Masonic legend. Other groups like the Philoleths and Illuminés de Montpellier are also listed by the source, just adding to the complex web.
The Swedish Rite, adopted at the convent of Wilhelmsbad, is linked by the source to several figures in earlier groups, creating another chain of influence.
Right. The source connects the Swedish Rite to Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick and alleges a link back to the Rosicrucian figure Johann Valentin Andrea, described here as the teacher of Comenius, who was a leader of the Moravian Brethren.
And the Moravians are linked back to.
It recalls the Moravian Brethren's alleged pledge to exterminate the Catholic Church, suspicion of secret Satanism, again, and the influence of Socinianism, an anti-Trinitarian movement. The source notes a plan from a 1643 meeting where Moravian members allegedly intended to enter guild lodges, specifically mentioning Freemasonry to use them as instruments, infiltrating from early on. These connections and claims are presented as originating from the source.
The post-French Revolution Freemasonry degrees are described again as masking a secret system, reinforcing that earlier point.
Yes. The source claims that the 3 initial philanthropic degrees of Freemasonry after the Revolution served to mask the secret Rose-Croix system operating above them, which involved alchemy and adeptus degrees, hidden layers. It notes that Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick allegedly revealed some of these secrets and had to be placed under guard as a consequence, suggesting revealing secrets had serious repercussions. These are presented as claims from the source.
An intriguing letter about the Great Fire of London in 1666 is included in the material. What does it suggest?
The source includes a letter dated 1697, purportedly written by an English spy, which suggests that the Duke of York, who later became the Catholic King James II, was brought into French interests in 1666, and more shockingly that he was allegedly rejoicing at the Great Fire of London because it financially ruined many anti-Catholic citizens who had opposed his religion, a very dark accusation. This is presented explicitly as content from the source about this letter.
The founding of the Scottish Rite Supreme Council in Charleston is noted, bringing us back to the U.S. context.
Right. The source mentions its founding in 1801 and highlights the role of Etienne Morin in its establishment. It identifies Charleston and Boston as the mother lodges of the United States, key locations in this narrative.
And finally, the source makes a very strong and direct claim about the role of Masonry in major historical revolutions, naming names.
Yes, it makes the sweeping statement that the American War of Independence and the French Revolution were prepared by Masonry. It lists prominent figures involved in these events: Washington, Lafayette, Franklin, Paul Jones, identifying them as high-rank Masons.
Evidence.
The source also mentions Washington attending the Masonic funeral of Grand Master Joseph Warren, killed at Bunker Hill, as supporting evidence. These are presented explicitly as claims made within the source.
The source concludes its historical details by noting a significant historical fact regarding the Catholic Church's view of Freemasonry.
Yes, it mentions the historical fact that Pope Clement XII excommunicated Freemasons in 1738 with the papal bull In Eminenti Apostolatus Specula. This was a definitive stance taken by the Catholic Church against the organization at that time, which is historically accurate. This is presented as a historical detail noted by the source.
Wow, okay. That was quite a journey, wasn't it? We've taken a deep dive into the very specific, very intricate, and often deeply disturbing world presented by the source material, Occult Theocracy.
It's certainly a challenging perspective to engage with. From the author's point of view, we've navigated a landscape filled with claims of pervasive secret societies, hidden occult rituals, clandestine networks, and centuries-long alleged plans aimed at domination and subversion.
And these operations are claimed to be woven through religious systems, major political events, and what the author presents as the highest levels of society. It's an all-encompassing vision.
Absolutely. We've explored allegations about the darker, alleged true meaning of occultism, the dualistic theology attributed to groups like Gnostics and Paladists, including those highly controversial claims about Lucifer being the good god in their view.
We've looked at the alleged use of hypnotism and fear as tools for control within initiation rites, turning people into passive tools.
And we've encountered the startling claims originating from this specific source about the Talmud containing a horrible moral code and alleged Jewish influence being a driving force behind major historical movements and secret societies, presented as part of a larger coordinated effort aimed at world dominion. Claims, we must stress again, are solely from this source.
Right. And we've also seen the extensive connections the source draws between seemingly disparate groups, Brahminists, Freemasons, Jesuits, Illuminati. It throws them all into the same pot, culminating in figures like Mazzini, Pike, and Lemmy.
And alleged events ranging from the William Morgan murder to political assassinations, all framed within this overarching narrative of hidden power structures manipulating world events.
As this source presents it, traditional safeguards, the things people rely on, are seen as illusory, a mirage. The simple act of trying to be good is portrayed as difficult or even something people fear doing.
Yeah, the author paints a picture where a hidden underworld is constantly working against the established order and what the author calls the better portion of humanity. Often, according to them, employing deception, secret alliances, manipulation of power, and dark esoteric practices.
The author's motivation seems clear. Exposing these alleged means and methods is presented as crucial knowledge for understanding the world from their particular, very specific perspective.
Knowledge is power, as they say, and this author clearly believes they are imparting powerful, hidden knowledge.
And that brings us to a final provocative thought drawn strictly from the themes and explicit statements within this source material we've just explored. As we noted, the source concludes its specific claims about Lemmy and the alleged Jewish satanic connection with the incredibly pointed phrase, "International Jewry has much to explain."
A direct challenge, loaded with historical baggage. It also dedicates space to alleging a deliberate policy of suppression aimed at obscuring these kinds of revelations or historical phases concerning figures like Pike and Mazzini, claiming the story is being hidden.
So considering these intense claims presented within the source material, claims involving centuries of conspiracy, hidden masters, occult forces, and secret pacts, and considering the author's assertion elsewhere in the book that knowledge is power, perhaps the most provocative thought to leave with you, the listener, is this. If even a fraction of what this source claims about pervasive hidden power structures, secret knowledge, and insidious influence holds true, what does it mean for how we understand the world around us?
Right. And maybe more fundamentally, how would one even begin to discern truth from elaborate fabrication when dealing with subjects that, by their very nature, are deliberately veiled in profoundest mystery, as the source itself claims these are?
It's a question this material leaves compellingly unanswered. It forces you to confront the possibility, however remote or however constructed by this author, of a reality far different, far more complex, or perhaps far darker than the commonly accepted narrative. Something to chew on,